Kill them all.
For over a decade, Michael Bay's Transformers films have been dismissed as the loud and soulless face of the modern blockbuster. Critics have called them sensory overload, incoherent, mindless, and, most damning of all, juvenile. But what if I told you they're none of these things? What if the first three Transformers films, Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen, and Dark of the Moon, are not only deliberately constructed, but thematically rich, emotionally resonant, and technically extraordinary? What if we've spent the last 15 years laughing at some of the most important and artful blockbusters of the 21st century? It is my sincere contention that Michael Bay's Transformers films deserve our respect, not just as blockbuster entertainment, but as cinematic art. We'll explore the surprisingly complex themes that run beneath the surface, the unique relevance of Sam Witwicky's story, the often overlooked brilliance of Michael Bay's direction, and the massive cultural shadow these films still cast. It's time to take Bayhem seriously. When you think of the Transformers movies, you think loud, chaotic, crude. They've been mocked, memed, and dismissed as everything wrong with modern blockbusters. Michael Bay's Transformers films have spent the better part of 2 decades being Hollywood's favorite punching bag, the go-to example of what happens when you give a director too much money, too much CGI, and too little oversight. But I want you to genuinely ask yourself, what if we were wrong? What if these movies, especially the original trilogy, weren't just cinematic junk food, but something more? What if they were reflections of a nation in crisis, statements about a betrayed generation, and visual masterclasses that pushed blockbuster filmmaking to its limits? My thesis is simple. Michael Bay's Transformers trilogy is among the most thematically rich and technically accomplished blockbuster franchises in the last 20 years. We don't blink twice when people write academic essays about The Lord of the Rings, George Lucas's Star Wars films, or The Dark Knight. But when it comes to Transformers, the assumption is there's nothing worth studying. That assumption is wrong and dismissive, and quite frankly, it has always been wrong and dismissive. I want to reframe how we look at Michael Bay's Transformers. Because the simple truth is, these movies reflect a post-9/11 America haunted by paranoia and power. Sam Witwicky has endured as a symbol of millennial disillusionment. And regardless of what you may think of him, Michael Bay is one of the most technically gifted directors working today, rivaled by almost no one in terms of his craft. The Transformers trilogy didn't just change blockbusters. It is the blueprint that we have all been following since. On the surface, Transformers is about alien robots punching each other. But beneath the chrome and explosions lies a surprisingly coherent and poetic thematic core, one built around legacy, meaning, and leadership in an uncertain world. These themes are most directly embodied in the Autobots themselves. They're not just heroic machines, they're cultural artifacts. Optimus Prime constantly speaks in terms of duty, heritage, and sacrifice. His rhetoric evokes ancient epics and religious texts, reframing this alien civil war as a mythic struggle for civilization itself. In Transformers, the opening lines from Optimus are not about the Decepticons or even Earth. They're about history, about the fall of Cybertron, and about preserving a lineage of values. With the Allspark gone, we cannot return life to our planet, but fate has yielded a reward. a new world to call home. This obsession with legacy continues through all three films. The Autobots aren't just fighting Megatron, they're fighting against the erosion of their cultural memory. The Allspark, the Primes, the Ark, Sentinel Prime, each film unearths some ancient betrayal, some buried truth, or some forgotten legend. This emphasis on legacy doesn't just belong to the Transformers. In fact, it reflects our own anxieties too, particularly in a post 9/11 United States. The early 2000s were marked by fear of the other, technological paranoia, and a growing distrust in government power. These themes are deeply embodied in the Transformers trilogy. In Revenge of the Fallen, the Decepticons don't just crash down from space, they infiltrate American cities, adopt human disguises, and weaponize our very infrastructure. It's terrorism by way of transformation. The US government's response: paranoia and control. They question the Autobots' loyalty, dismantle nests, and assert unilateral power. In Dark of the Moon, this conflict only escalates. Earth's leaders abandon the Autobots in the name of peace, only to enable a full scale invasion. The result is one of the most brutal depictions of urban destruction in blockbuster cinema, and a visual metaphor for the very real chaos that can emerge when power is wielded without foresight. Technology, too, becomes a source of unease. Even as humans attempt to control it via reverse engineering, black ops, or weaponization, they remain deeply outmatched. Transformers positions technology as both a savior and a threat, a duality that mirrors early 21st century fears about surveillance, automation, and drone warfare. But most critically, the trilogy asks a question we rarely associate with the popcorn franchise: who deserves to lead? Megatron leads by force, Sentinel leads by betrayal, Optimus leads by sacrifice, and the humans, well, they mostly react because that's what we do in a situation where we are faced with terror. The franchise constantly repositions its leadership figures, always framing their decisions as consequential, not just tactically, but morally. For all the explosions, Transformers is deeply concerned with the responsibility of power. While that may sound lofty, it's remarkably consistent across this trilogy. These aren't just action movies, they're parables coated in steel and fire about what it means to inherit a broken world and whether you'll fight to preserve it or burn it all down. The Transformers films didn't invent destruction on screen, but they changed the way we look at it. Starting with the first film in 2007, Michael Bay crafted a trilogy that's obsessed with the spectacle of annihilation. Cities crumble, skies split open, monuments are turned to ash. But none of this is mindless, because beneath the metal on metal carnage, Transformers is responding viscerally to a unique American trauma. In a post 9/11 cultural landscape, American blockbusters began to change. Fear of invasion, collapsing towers, invisible enemies, distrust in government, these weren't just plot points, they were symptoms of a national psyche in crisis. And no franchise externalized that crisis with more intensity than Transformers. The Decepticons are alien, inhuman infiltrators. Their greatest weapon isn't just brute strength, it's mimicry, it's deception. They disguise themselves as symbol of power and order. Fighter jets, police cruisers, government tech. The fear isn't that we'll be attacked. The fear is that the enemy is already here. This is the exact anxiety that shaped post 9/11 surveillance culture. Who's listening? Who's watching? Who can you trust? Transformers is drenched in surveillance imagery, satellite eyes tracking global movement, military networks intercepting alien signals, secret government agencies operating without oversight. Sure, none of it's subtle, but it's not meant to be. Bay wants us to feel watched, to feel overwhelmed by a state that's just barely in control of what it claims to protect. Sector 7 doesn't exist, except for the fact that it does, and it's operating with full authority. Transformers doesn't trust the people in charge, it just hopes they're the least bad option. Then there's the destruction itself. The Battle of Chicago in Dark of the Moon is one of the most sustained and detailed depictions of urban annihilation in modern cinema. And yes, it is overwhelming, but there's an artistry to the way Bay stages destruction, wide shots that emphasize geography, long takes that let the weight of a collapsing building settle. A city becomes a war zone, and we don't cut away from it. This isn't destruction as background noise. This is trauma, rendered in the 239 to 1 aspect ratio. In her essay, The Imagination of Disaster, Susan Sontag argued that spectacle lets us rehearse collective fear, that, quote, the lure of the fantastical lies in the immensity of what might go wrong. Transformers plays on that lure and then makes it real. When people talk about the Battle of New York in the Avengers, it's usually with admiration. But just 1 year earlier, Transformers Dark of the Moon staged a nearly identical climax with more complexity, more texture, more depth, and arguably more thematic weight. It's not just that Bay did it first, it's that Bay did it better. Before the Avengers made disaster feel clean, Transformers made it feel terrifying. In the years since, cinematic destruction has become routine, but few films match the sheer scale and mood of Bay's imagery because Transformers wasn't trying to sell heroism. It was showing us what happens when heroes fail, or worse, when they're not enough. And at the heart of this destruction, caught between the gods and monsters, is a kid named Sam Witwicky. He doesn't have powers, he's not a soldier, he just wants his life to matter. And what happens to him might be the most tragic part of all. If Optimus Prime is the moral center of the Transformers universe, then Sam Witwicky is its emotional one. While it's easy to laugh at Shia LaBeouf's frantic energy or the franchise's obsession with screaming, Sam represents something rare in blockbuster cinema. He's the everyman who saves the world and then gets discarded by it. He does everything right. He respects his parents. He works a dead end job. He goes to college. He dates the woman of his dreams. He saves the planet twice. And yet, by the time we reach Dark of the Moon, none of this matters. Sam is unemployed, directionless, and utterly replaceable in the eyes of the government he helped protect. His resume includes defeating intergalactic warlords, but he still can't get a job that pays. It's played for laughs, but the subtext isn't funny, it's existential. Sam's story is about what happens when achievement meets indifference. He's caught in a world where effort is supposed to lead to meaning, but the institutions around him, employers, government, and even the Autobots, are indifferent to his past and unmoved by his value. This is more than character development, it's generational commentary. Dark of the Moon was released in 2011 in the wake of the financial crisis, rising student debt, and the growing realization that millennials might be the first generation in modern US history to be worse off than their parents. Sam's breakdowns, his anger, insecurity, and desperation to matter reflect this crisis of meaning. I just want to be back in the world, out there. I feel like I'm not doing anything that matters anymore. He isn't trying to be famous or rich, he's trying to feel relevant. And in a world ruled by mechanical gods, where even heroism is outsourced, Sam's journey becomes one of identity. Unlike superheroes or chosen ones, Sam has no powers. He survives through wit, will, and sheer dumb luck. But that's what makes him a meaningful figure, because his story doesn't end in triumph, it ends in rejection, then reinvention. And to see how radical that is, we need to look at the kind of protagonist that other blockbusters were offering at the time. Take Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's version, aka the best version from Sam Raimi's Spider Man trilogy. Peter is also awkward, also anxious, also thrust into a heroic role he didn't ask for. But where Peter's struggles are rewarded with purpose, Sam's are punished with silence. Peter sacrifices his happiness for something greater and is honored for it. He is given meaning. Sam does the same and is handed a job application. Peter is what happens when doing the right thing still matters. Sam is what happens when doing the right thing is no longer enough. But there's another important contrast worth drawing. Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. Katniss is also unwilling at first, an ordinary girl thrown into extraordinary circumstances. Like Sam, she's used by a larger system for her symbolic value. But unlike Sam, she eventually overcomes the system. She tears it down, reclaims her narrative, and escapes with a new sense of identity. Sam never gets that closure. He isn't weaponized by the system, he's forgotten by it. Katniss becomes the face of a revolution. Sam becomes a punchline in a boardroom. Katniss is what happens when you're used by a system that needs you, while Sam is what happens when you're discarded by a system that doesn't. And that's what makes Sam so important. His arc isn't inspirational, it's recognizable. He speaks to a generation that was told to follow the rules, put in the work, and believe in the system, only to find out that the system had no place for them. In Dark of the Moon, Sam takes the fight back into his own hands, not because he's asked to, but because he chooses to. He becomes a hero again, not for glory, but to reclaim his agency. He's not a soldier, a prime, or a savior. He's just a guy doing the best he can in a world that's moved on without him. In that sense, Sam Witwicky might be the most honest millennial character ever put to screen, because he shows us that even in a world of alien gods and global war, the hardest battle is proving that you still matter. From the moment we meet him, Sam is chasing something familiar: the car, the girl, the upward trajectory. He's been told that if he follows the rules, gets good grades, respects his parents, keeps his head down, he'll be rewarded. That's the myth millennials were raised on: work hard, stay in school, and the system will take care of you. Sam is us. He's not a superhero. He's not a genius. He's not even particularly brave. He's just trying to find his place in a world that keeps telling him it's already full. And yet, against all odds, Sam becomes the guy who saves the world. He outruns alien death machines. He sacrifices his safety and even his life to protect people he doesn't know. And the reward is not that much. By the sequel, Revenge of the Fallen, Sam is trying to move on. He's earned peace, a future, but he doesn't get it. He's pulled back in, and when he dies saving the world a second time, genuine clinical death, the universe doesn't hand him a purpose, it hands him silence. In Dark of the Moon, Sam is a nobody. He has a medal from President Obama. He saved humanity twice, and he still can't get hired. He did everything right, and none of it mattered. This is where the satire kicks in. Transformers Dark of the Moon is a comedy, but a tragic one. Sam Witwicky is a parody of the disillusioned millennial, overqualified, underemployed, and emotionally stranded. The world he was promised is gone, and the one that replaced it has no place for him. He is a ghost in his own story, a war hero who no longer fits in the world he helped save. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes that today's society of achievement doesn't destroy people through external control, but through internal collapse. Sam doesn't get destroyed by Decepticons, he gets destroyed by irrelevance. But what makes Sam powerful isn't that he wins, it's that he loses and still shows up. He's mocked, he's discarded, but he keeps running into the fire. He doesn't do it for glory, he doesn't do it for power, he does it because it's right. That's the contradiction at the heart of his character. He believes in meaning even when the world tells him there isn't any. And part of what makes Sam so believable, so raw, is that Shia LaBeouf doesn't play him like a standard blockbuster protagonist. He's messy, he's neurotic, he's always teetering on the edge of panic. And that energy, it's real. It comes from somewhere deeper. Shia LaBeouf has had a difficult, deeply public life. And while this video isn't about that, it's impossible not to see how those internal struggles bleed into the performance. There's a desperation to Sam that feels lived in, an edge of collapse beneath every outburst. He's not a stoic hero. He's a young man who's been asked to carry more than anyone should ever have to, and he is breaking under the weight of it. That is why Sam lands. That is why he endures, because Shia plays him like he's not in a fantasy, but he is in a fight for his soul. Sam Witwicky isn't just comic relief. He's the emotional engine of the Transformers trilogy, a generational symbol of what happens when a system fails the people who believed in it the most. And while the world forgets him, we shouldn't, because his story, his performance, and his pain are all real. His story is ours. To understand why the Transformers trilogy deserves artistic recognition, we need to talk about the elephant sized robot in the room, Michael Bay. Bay is one of the most divisive directors in modern Hollywood. To some, he's a punchline, the god of explosions and slow motion Djangoism. To others, he's a visual stylist with a signature no one can replicate. But whether you love him or hate him, one thing you can't call him is sloppy. Because Michael Bay is a technical master of his craft, and nowhere is that mastery more evident than in the Transformers trilogy. These films are a study in controlled chaos. Bay uses movement, framing, and cutting not to confuse, but to energize. His style is maximalist, yes, but it's also remarkably legible when you pay attention to how it's constructed. First, there's camera movement. Bay rarely shoots static. Instead, the camera is constantly gliding, panning, and circling. This isn't just for style, it creates a sense of velocity that mirrors the characters themselves, especially the Transformers. The Transformers aren't static beings, they're kinetic, constantly shifting between forms. Bay's camera mimics that logic. Then there's framing. Bay composes in depth. He stacks planes of action, foreground, midground, background, creating images that feel dense and alive. A soldier in the front, a robot mid frame, a fighter jet blazing past in the back, all in one shot. And when it comes to spatial clarity, Bay outclasses many of his contemporaries. Just compare the forest fight in Revenge of the Fallen to one of the Budapest chase scenes in Black Widow. In Transformers, Optimus Prime takes on three Decepticons in the forest. The camera is fluid but disciplined. The geography of the scene is clear. We know where Optimus is, who he's fighting, and how the fight moves through the trees. There's a crescendo to it, rising tension, visual escalation, and a brutal payoff. In Black Widow, by contrast, the Budapest chase is cluttered with shaky cam, tight framing, and spatial disorientation. The action exists, but the space doesn't. It's kinetic, but confusing. Bay's fights have weight, purpose, and rhythm. And this clarity isn't just present in big set pieces, it's in small moments too, like the fight between Optimus and Bone Crusher in the first film. Watch how Bay places the camera inside the car as the fight explodes around it. We see the Decepticons from the sunroof, then through the windshield, then from the passenger side window, all while maintaining a grounded human perspective. The fight isn't just happening to the robots, it's happening to us. That's intentional. That's direction. Bay's action isn't just about spectacle, it's about immersion. His use of light is similarly deliberate. Bay often lights his scene like paintings, golden hour skies, low key silhouettes, and harsh flares. It's romantic, operatic, even baroque. Bay's frames almost look like Italian impressionistic paintings at times. Any shot in a Michael Bay movie would be the best shot in any other director's movie. And yes, he cuts quickly, but his action is almost always spatially coherent. When Optimus Prime launches into battle in Dark of the Moon, the editing may be fast, but the geography is clear. You know who's where, what they're doing, and how the momentum shifts. Compare that to, say, the shaky cam chaos of the Bourne sequels or even some later MCU films where the action becomes frictionless and weightless. Bay's action has mass. When a transformer hits the ground, you feel it because the frame is built to sell impact. What's often dismissed as Bayhem, a term coined to describe his visual excess, is a consistent aesthetic language, one built around power, velocity, and mythic scale. Take the infamous 360 hero shot. The camera sweeps around a character as they rise into the frame, background flaring behind them. It's not subtle, but it's not meaningless either. It visually elevates the characters from ordinary to epic. It's a visual reminder that in Bay's world, even a guy holding a t shirt cannon in a parking lot can look like a god. And then there's scale. Bay makes humans and robots feel like they share the same world. The Transformers don't just tower over humans, they interact with them physically. They crash into buildings, toss cars, and blast pavement. The camera is often low, mimicking a human point of view, making their size feel terrifying, not just impressive. Say what you want about the dialogue or the crude humor or the product placement, but when it comes to pure direction, blocking, movement, light, and energy, Bay is in a league very few can touch. And in an era where so many blockbusters are flattened by sameness, Michael Bay's Transformers films stand out not for their excess, but for their commitment to visual maximalism as a form of storytelling and the singular voice of an artist. They don't just show us chaos, they show us how chaos moves. If a theme is what a film says, then style is how it communicates that theme. And nobody says it quite like Michael Bay. Over the years, Bayhem has become shorthand for chaos, a punchline for visual excess. But what critics miss is that Bay's style is precise, calculated, and even musical. When he's firing on all cylinders, especially in the Transformers trilogy, the results aren't just spectacular, they're symphonic. Michael Bay doesn't shoot coverage, he composes moments. Every frame is designed to move, not just physically, but emotionally. I want to return back to this first case study of Bone Crusher versus Optimus in Transformers. Most directors would shoot this moment from wide angles or overhead shots to make it safe, distant, and readable. But Michael Bay doesn't do that. Instead, he locks us inside the car with the innocent civilians. The camera tracks through the windshield, side windows, and even the sunroof, placing us in real danger, forcing us to feel the scale of these machines. This isn't just spectacle, it's perspective, and it allows Bay to frame these shots perfectly. Our second case study, again returning to the forest fight in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, we have three Decepticons, one Optimus, no shaky cam, no CGI blur, just stunning clarity, blocked like a ballet. Bay uses the tree line for scale, the sun for silhouette, and the frame for rhythm. Each hit lands, each movement has weight, and you always know where everyone is. It's one of the best choreographed action scenes of the 21st century, and yes, it's in a Michael Bay movie. There is another myth that Michael Bay hides behind CGI, but in reality, few directors push for practical effects harder. He crashes real cars. He detonates real charges. He coordinates with real soldiers flying real aircraft. And when he does use CGI, it holds up better than most films made a decade later. Why? Because Bay doesn't use CGI to replace reality, he uses it to augment it. Watch a Michael Bay film without sound, and you can still tell who made it. That is authorship. The golden hour sunsets, the circular tracking shots, the sudden tilt up into the sky. It's not subtle, but it's not empty either. I know I keep saying this, but Bay's images feel enormous, like they were designed for myth. He films machines like gods, humans like ants, but he manages to make us feel both of these things in the Transformers trilogy. Scholar Jeff King once wrote that in spectacle driven cinema, narrative is subservient to the pleasures of the image. But Bay's images are the narrative. They tell us how to feel, where to look, and what matters. It's easy to dunk on Michael Bay. It's harder to admit what he actually accomplishes, shot after shot, sequence after sequence. A single moment in a Transformers film, the sweep of a camera, the composition of a frame would be a career highlight for another director. And in Bay's hands, these techniques are just another Tuesday. If Michael Bay is guilty of anything, it's ambition. Ambition without apology. He doesn't want to entertain you quietly, he wants to burn a hole into your screen. And for three Transformers films, that's exactly what he does. For all of the discourse around Michael Bay's Transformers films, for all of the memes, mockery, and think pieces, the cultural truth is unavoidable. Transformers changed blockbuster filmmaking, not quietly, not subtly, loudly, and in full surround sound. While critics and cinephiles may have dismissed the franchise as brainless, Hollywood took notes. The evidence? Just look at the films that came after. Let's start with The Avengers, released 1 year after Transformers Dark of the Moon, and it's widely considered to be the gold standard of modern superhero cinema. It is the definitive blockbuster of the 2010s, but structurally, visually, and even tactically, it borrows directly from Michael Bay. The Battle of New York is a clean, less visually interesting copy of the Battle of Chicago. Alien invasion, portal in the sky, giant snake like enemies are weaving through skyscrapers, military forces on the ground, a civilian rescue subplot, even the shifting aerial perspective, tracking the heroes mid fight from building to building, is pure bayhem. This isn't a coincidence, it's evolution. Bay showed that spectacle could be operatic, that action could be maximalist, fast, and still readable. And most importantly, that global audiences would respond to this. But his influence didn't stop at visuals. Transformers helped redefine the blockbuster template. Ensemble cast of quirky specialists, government agencies operating in secrecy, global stakes anchored to personal emotion, and a messianic outsider as the key to world saving technology. Sound familiar? It should, because that's not just Transformers. That's half of the MCU, Pacific Rim, Godzilla vs. Kong, Independence Day Resurgence, and even Fast and Furious in its later phases. But Bay's influence isn't just found in what other films copied, it's in what other films could no longer ignore. The bar for action scale was raised permanently. Transformers taught studios that the global audience didn't just tolerate heavy doses of chaos, they craved it. The trilogy's success overseas, particularly in Asia, restructured how Hollywood viewed the international blockbuster. But the legacy is deeper than just market impact because here's the truth: Transformers gave us one of the last moments in blockbuster history where pure, unfiltered directorial voice was allowed to dominate a $1 billion franchise. It's not polished by committee like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not flattened in previs like some later Star Wars films. It's Michael Bay's vision, completely uncompromised. For better or worse, Transformers is auteurism at scale. And if we're willing to give that level of academic scrutiny to The Lord of the Rings or George Lucas's Star Wars, then we need to give Michael Bay and the Transformers trilogy that same respect. Because Bay didn't just shape a franchise, he shaped a decade. When people talk about the evolution of blockbuster cinema, the visual language of 21st century spectacle, they tend to reference The Dark Knight or maybe even The Avengers, but they rarely talk about Transformers. The final act of Dark of the Moon is one of the most ambitious and textured action sequences in modern cinema. A citywide siege executed with practical debris, smoke layering, aerial photography, and a brutal sense of scale. 1 year later, the Avengers gave us something strikingly similar: alien invaders descending from portals, a city under siege, quippy heroes framed against a crumbling skyline. But where the Avengers gave us a comic book come to life, clean, stylized, even playful, Transformers gave us something dirtier, angrier, more American. The camera in Transformers isn't admiring the destruction, it's suffocating in it. After Transformers Dark of the Moon, urban annihilation became a staple of the modern blockbuster. It would appear in movies like Man of Steel, Pacific Rim, Godzilla 2014, Age of Ultron, Captain America Civil War, and on and on. And audiences continued to respond, not because they wanted carnage, but because they understood it. The iconography of Transformers, cities as backgrounds, towers falling like dominoes, alien war machines hovering over skylines, became the visual shorthand for global threat. In other words, Michael Bay didn't just influence the conversation, he rewrote the grammar. And yet, he gets no credit. When we praise Whedon, Snyder, or Nolan, we speak of them as visionaries. But Michael Bay, he's the joke. He's the frat boy with a camera, the explosion guy. Why? Because his movies are loud, because they're vulgar, because they're messy and maximalist and unapologetically emotional? Maybe. But maybe it's because we're still uncomfortable with the kind of truth Transformers reflects back at us. In her writing on aesthetics of destruction, critic Christina Kennedy argues that, quote, what we ridicule in disaster spectacle is often what we fear most about our own vulnerability. And maybe that's why Bay showed us not how we want to see ourselves, but how we actually look in collapse. The Transformers trilogy wasn't a fluke, it was a forecast. And while Hollywood moved on, borrowing its language, mimicking its scope, Bay's films remain uncredited pioneers. And maybe that's the final irony, that a franchise about robots that transform was never allowed to evolve in our minds as something more than the trashiest of Hollywood trash.
Optimus, all I ever wanted was the survival of our race. You must see why I had to betray you.
You didn't betray me. You betrayed yourself.
No, Optimus!
It's easy to mock the Transformers films. They're loud, they're indulgent, they're filled with product placement, explosions, and juvenile humor. But those very same qualities are also what make them extremely honest. The Transformers trilogy isn't pretending to be something it's not. It's not dressed up in genre cynicism or elevated posturing that we see in the 2020s. It is a franchise that looks directly at the chaos of the 21st century and mirrors it back at us in chrome and flame. Beneath the bombast, there's meaning. A generation struggling to matter. A world obsessed with legacy. A film language that dares to move too fast, too big, and too much, yet remains coherent. That's art. Not perfect art, not subtle art, but art made with vision, scale, and complete commitment. And that deserves respect. So maybe the real question isn't whether or not Transformers is worthy of academic study. Maybe the question is, what took us so long? For years we have treated these movies as the end of something, whether it be the collapse of taste or the death of subtlety, when in fact we should have been looking at these movies as the beginning of something else entirely. A new kind of blockbuster, a new kind of spectacle, a new way of looking at what movies could do and say in a post-9/11 world. They told us these films were empty. They told us these films were stupid, excessive, hollow. But we failed to see the grief beneath the noise. We didn't see the kid who did everything right and still got left behind. We failed to see the filmmaker who choreographed chaos like a symphony, who blew up cities not for fun, but to show us what collapse actually felt like. There's pain in these movies, and beauty, and awe. They're messy, yes, but so was the world they came from, and still is. If we can write books about Star Wars, if we can teach courses about the Lord of the Rings, if we can analyze the Avengers frame by frame, then we can sit down and look, really look, at Transformers. There's so much to like here. even on the surface. Yes, these are all fun movies. Giant alien robots fight on highways. Bumblebee speaks entirely through radio clips. These movies are full of absurdity, adrenaline, and moments that felt like they were directed by a 12-year-old with a multi-million-dollar budget. But I say that in the best way possible. That's part of the magic. That's part of the authorship. Because even amid all the chaos and crisis, Transformers never forgets how to thrill. There is so much to love and admire here. I didn't even touch on how Michaela Baines is a stand-in for Michael Bay himself. On the surface, Michaela is a superficial and shallow young woman who is admired strictly for her looks and aesthetics, but actually, if one were to take a deeper look at her, she is arguably the most competent character in the entire film. Much in the same way that Michael Bay himself is often reduced to his visual style, but people fail to understand what he is actually capable of as a filmmaker, if only they took the time to study him. I didn't even talk about why I love Revenge of the Fallen, despite all of the criticisms that have been levied against that movie. I didn't talk about how I think Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox have arguably the best on-screen chemistry I've ever seen. There's still so much more to unpack here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and of course, consider subscribing. I want to leave you with this. Maybe the Transformers movies were never just noise. Maybe they were joy, grief, wonder, spectacle. Maybe they were more than meets the eye. Peace, plants, namaste.